So S17 and the S20 framework is about sales standards. So this is ultimately from a management perspective, the standards that you're going to hold reps accountable to, right? So these are the high level standards that you're communicating in the recruiting process, you're reinforcing in the onboarding process, and you're holding people accountable to them in the management process, which is what we're covering today. So some of the stuff you've heard multiple times this week, you know, the stages, the reporting, the numbers, all of these things that you continue to hear, that should be a highlight for you that, hey, this continues to come up, at least half of the days that in the boot camp this week, meaning that it's probably pretty important for me to, outline these things for our organization. But anyways, standards, this is your sales standards, what you're going to hold reps accountable to. Now, there's three basics that the book talks about. There are the most, arguably the most important thing, which are the activity and the production standards, but it's also the behavioral standards. Both are really important, right? You don't want, reps on your team that are punks. You want people to be behaving in a specific way. If you remember on the recruiting day, when we talked about the career paths, well, one of the examples that we gave is we talked about a rep advancing into sales leadership. And I said, there's typically a handful of things, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 things that you want to see consistently over a 90-day period. That's always going to be custom to, every opportunity, but there's going to be overlapping things. And we talked about things like we want to see that you're performing at a top 20% level or top 10% level, that you're following the sales system, that you're coachable, that you're not, falsifying information in the sales process to get deals and causing customer problems for us, that you're participating in the management process and showing up with a good attitude, right? We listed off some of those things on Wednesday. Your behavioral standards as it relates to, this topic S17 are things that you want to get clear on, right? And there's going to be a lot of commonalities for you. There's a whole list of ideas here in the S20 book, and they're typically going to be, fairly similar for most companies, right? You want people to show up with a good attitude, participate in the management process, follow the sales system, etc. So in S17, it's about, hey, what are gonna be our standards for the organization, for our sales team that we're ultimately going to hold reps accountable to? So we have behavioral standards. How are you going to show up from an attitude perspective, a behavioral perspective in our sales team? And then ultimately the activity and the production standards, which we'll, spend a little bit more time here. And so you guys have heard me go through this multiple times now, multiple times. This example, we've gone through a couple examples this week when I'm talking through sales process to better illustrate some of the stuff I'm saying, right? There was the B2B, sales modeled example where reps are managing their full A to Z sales cycle, where they generate their leads, they cold call those leads, they, with the goal of setting an appointment into a discovery meeting, they do a discovery meeting. If it makes sense to take next steps, they move that prospect to a presentation meeting, then follow up and close. And you've seen me write that up probably, 3, 4, 5, 6 times this week. So I'm going to go with that example today. We did another example, direct to consumer example where, it's territory management, knock for the purpose of setting appointments, pitch in the home, and then close. That was a 4-stage process. For the sake of time today, because it's Friday, I'm not going to go through both examples, but in S17, it's about the behavioral standards and the activity and the production standards. Now, foundationally, this is going to be a lot easier for you to put together if you've done what we talked about in day 2 correctly, right? Day 2, it was sales process, S5, S6 was sales technology, sales process built out correctly, plus the sales tech gave us the foundation to do S7 correctly, which was your sales reporting. And this really funnels from sales reporting, right? So as an example, if I have this 6-stage sales process, collect leads, cold call leads for the purpose of setting an appointment. We got our first appointment discovery meeting, second appointment presentation meeting, then it's hypothetically a longer sales cycle, not a one call close type of opportunity. So there's a stage of follow-up, and then there's a stage of closing. And, we talk about, hey, that's an administrative process of, collecting the payment, the agreement, and this is an administrative process of collecting the leads. And these are kind of topics we've been covering this week. Well, if you remember on the reporting day on Tuesday, we talked about example numbers. So let's kind of recap on some of those things. So standards, when you are recruiting a rep, like we covered, I think on Wednesday, you want to set the best expectations possible in the recruiting process. So let's say that in this example, for a rep to see a specific kind of financial success, hypothetically $100,000 per year in bare minimum income, if we know conservatively they need to add 20 leads to the system daily, which is 100 weekly, which is 400 leads a month, They need to make 40 calls a day, which is 200 weekly, which is 800 a month. They need to set 2 discovery meetings a day, 10 a week and 40 a month. They need to do 1 presentation meeting a day, 5 a week and 20 a month. And that's going to ultimately result into 1 close a week and 4 closes a month. We'll go through that again. Again, these are not your numbers, but if I know these kind of basics, these things, for the sake of clarity and expectations in the recruiting process, they're going to come up in some way, right? So in the recruiting process, I'm saying, hey, for those of you who are not familiar with our model and our industry yet, I just want to give you a decent understanding around our sales process on what it looks like day to day from an activity perspective to actually see success. Because I want you to kind of picture the sales system. Because if you commit to taking next steps in our recruiting process and we meet you in a one-on-one meeting, I want you to have at least a decent understanding of the sales system so you know, hey, this is really what it looks like, and I'm confident in taking next steps, and I desire to execute in the sales system based on what I've learned today. And so you start to communicate a little bit of the details so that the rep has a picture of what it looks like to be successful. And you also communicate that, hey, we know what success looks like here, and we want a successful team. And the reason that we're communicating this to you in the recruiting process today is because, this is going to come up multiple times in the future if you join our team. So you're hearing it for the first time today. We'll probably flesh out some more details in your one-on-one interview. If you end up taking next steps after this group call, you're going to hear it over and over and over in the first couple of weeks in onboarding, and then it's going to be reinforced in the management process. And so these are important numbers. And if you're not committed to coming on board and executing this kind of activity, then it just does not make sense for you to take next steps. So my point is you're communicating these things in the recruiting process, expectations, and then you're getting to onboarding and you're reinforcing the numbers because it's all about clarity and expectations and reminding reps what it is that they need to do to be successful. And so this is coming up in onboarding again. So by the time that the reps through their first full week, they have a deep understanding of the numbers that they need to execute to ramp up into a specific kind of success. Okay. But anyways, sales standards, this is foundationally starting in day 2, reporting. Sales standards is about just bringing that reporting to the surface and using it from a management perspective. Okay, so as an example, if for leads, again, I know that foundationally a rep needs to add 20 leads to the system, 100 a week, which is 400 a month. Well, I'm going to be communicating that in the recruiting and onboarding process, and then tracking these things and bringing it forth into team meetings and one-on-one meetings, like we'll talk about here in a little bit, because we want to take the reporting, the activity, the production that comes from that activity, and make sure that's displayed publicly in front of the sales team in your team meetings, but also communicate one-on-one with your reps for accountability reasons in your rep meetings. Okay. One of the things that companies get concerned about when they don't have a large team is having conflict in the management process with their reps. Okay. So a lot of companies that are like at the beginning phases of building a commission-based sales team, or maybe they have a little bit of a sales team and they start to think about the management process more and reporting more and accountability a little bit more. They get a little bit afraid or concerned about confronting numbers or communicating numbers and holding reps accountable to whatever it is that the standards are in the business. And what's great about that is, at least if we go back to day 3 and day 4, once you know how to successfully recruit and onboard and you start to scale up your team and you don't feel victim to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reps that, the majority of your revenue depends on, then you're not as worried about executing the management side of the, uh, you know, building your team, which is actually holding reps accountable and having hard conversations if needed, if that makes sense. So for any of you who are like, hey, I've got these 3 reps, I don't know how that conversation would go if I said, hey, here's now the expectations and we're going to hold you accountable to these things. I feel like there would be kind of too much conflict there. Okay. And that's really nuanced depending on if you're going to start that with your small existing team, if it is a small team, or if you're going to just start pressing into these kind of things as you scale up new reps. But at some time in the future, the ideal would be you're consistently executing on recruiting and onboarding functions. You know how to scale up your team. You're no longer a victim to the current reps, which means you feel like you got a little bit more power in, growing the organization and holding people accountable, and you can start to tighten up the standards and the culture of your sales team if you're following. Okay. But anyways, really simple sales standards as S17. It's about your behavioral, activity, and production standards. Okay, so anybody that's going to be a part of this organization, hypothetically, here's the minimum. Every single day, and these are averages. So you want to understand the numbers, but typically you're going to track things on a week, to monthly basis, right? So I got daily, weekly, monthly here for all these hypothetical, stages here. So I know on a weekly basis, the bare minimum that I want to see is that each rep is adding 100 leads to the CRM. Now, if the rep is hitting this benchmark as a commission-based sales rep and they're getting the end result correctly, I'm not going to be as worried about this. But if they're below the bare minimum from a production perspective and they're below the required leads inputted, calls made, discovery meetings made, etc., then that's something that I need to have a conversation with them about, a conversation with them about it. Okay. And so you want to get an understanding of, hey, what is the weekly and the monthly production requirements? You want to communicate that to the team and then have some type of process where you bring that into the management process. So typically there's going to be administrative responsibilities to kind of gather the data if you have the sales tech to even track these things. Again, you're not going to worry too much about this if you're not even dialed yet on, day, your sales system, which is what we covered day two. Again, day two was S5 sales process, S6 sales technology, S7 sales reporting. Sales process is foundational to your sales tech. Sales tech is foundational to your reporting. If you're not reporting yet, you're not going to be able to do any of this. So this maybe doesn't matter for you as much. Usually the management day, especially for a company who's under like 5 or 10 reps, they're just not even in this area yet. It doesn't matter to them at this point. Typically they're, focusing more on, foundations and sales systems, which is day 1 and 2, which I'll talk more a little bit more, talk more about at the end. But the ideal is you get an understanding again, weekly, monthly production requirements for the core KPIs that you're reporting. In this example, we're tracking how many closes that they're getting, how many presentation meetings that they're doing, how many discovery meetings that they're doing, how many calls they're doing, and how many leads that they're inputting. So leads, 20 a day, 100 a week, 400 a month. Calls, 40 a day, 200 a week, 800 a month. Discovery meetings scheduled and showed, 2 scheduled a day, 1 showed a day, 10 scheduled a week, 5 showed a week, 40 scheduled a month, 20 showed a month. Presentation meetings scheduled and showed, there's the 3 numbers. And then the end result from that uh, on a closing basis is hypothetically this. Okay. And again, we want to be tracking those things and getting an understanding of them weekly. So I can go, okay, we got our 7 reps. Here's what each individual 7 reps are doing. Here's how they did in these 5 areas within our 6-stage sales process or whatever it is for you. And how is that going to dictate how I execute the training aspect of our sales team meetings this coming week? Or how is that going to dictate specific conversations I have in our one-on-one rep meetings this coming week if those are coming up for us? Which meetings is S19? Okay, if you have any questions around this topic, please drop it in the Zoom chat box and we'll get to that at the end. Accountability naturally comes as the team gets larger and you get better at building your team. We got good foundations, good sales systems. We're executing recruiting, executing onboarding. We know how to scale revenue now, and then we get tighter on our standards and accountability. But we'll run through this real quick. For most, they're not thinking about this topic too, but it's an important topic and it's worth putting into the framework, which is why it's here. And this is S18 sales incentives. So incentives is really about reinforcing whatever it is that the standards are, right? So if you don't have specific standards, right? If there's not clarity here, like, hey, this is what it looks like to behave at this organization. This is what it looks like to successfully do activities at this organization. And this is what, successful production looks like at this organization. If that's not clear, then your sales incentives are not going to be properly in line because sales incentives, it's, from my perspective, it's separate from the compensation plan. It's additional incentives. And what you're doing is you're rewarding specific standards or better, meaning that if we have, excuse me, if we have these 5 behavioral standards, hey, we want to see you show up this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and we have these 5 things that we're tracking on the activity and production side of our sales process, well, whatever those minimums are or better, I want to incentivize and reward reps, sometimes financially, sometimes verbally for accomplishing those things or better. Okay. So we didn't dive into it actually, but because it's a little bit kind of too much for today. But on the sales standard side, if we just use the, leads input example, which is not relevant to everybody's sales process example. But if you remember, I said, hey, minimum hypothetically 20 leads a day, 100 a week, 400 a month. Okay. Well, once you have a foundation set and you're reporting and you're starting to bring these things in a, management and you've developed standards, you can get a little bit more creative there as well. And you can go, hey, we're going to set a few different categories for this topic because maybe we have the tech and the administrative staff to track these things. We're going to go, hey, here's our minimum 20, 100, 400. Okay. And then we're going to have, um, you know, uh, kind of levels from there, right? So, hey, let's kind of benchmark what it looks like to see success above the bare minimums that we expect. So maybe it's, 30, 150, and 600. And then maybe it's, 40, 200, 800, meaning that, hey, we've got a few categories. We got the minimum here. We'll call this red. We'll call this yellow. And we'll call this green. And we got 20, 100, 400, which is the bare minimum we expect at this organization. And once we have that foundation, if we have the reporting or administrative ability to kind of get a little bit more creative with the way that we're reporting, we could go, hey, let's create a kind of another layer from there, which is yellow, 30, 150, 600, which is 50% above our minimum expectations. And then let's create a green, which is the very best, which is 100% above our minimum expectations, which is 4,200, 800. Again, a lot of numbers. We're going quickly, but hopefully you're following. My point is, as it relates to incentives, to give you an example, incentives are there to reward people either verbally or financially, um, or with a prize or whatever, based on them hitting the standards or better. And it starts all with having the actual standards in place. So I could, over time, as an example, track these things just on the lead sales stage pipeline. And at the beginning of tracking, I'm incentivizing or I'm providing incentives, whether that's verbal or financial, for reps hitting the minimums. But as my reporting gets a little bit more creative, I can say, hey, John actually did, this week. He did 50% above the average. He hit our yellow benchmark for leads input into the system. And John, I just wanted to recognize you for accomplishing that. So awesome job, crushing stage one last week, or whatever. Or hey, Sally, she did 100% above the lead submission. Sally's new; she's in her first month, and her first month she did 100% more on the lead submission stage one, building up her pipeline. Sally, I just wanted to recognize you. You did 2 times more than the minimum expectation or standard. And man, you're setting such a good foundation to see success in this organization. We'd love to see that. So thank you for putting in the effort in your first month. Such an awesome job there, right? So I'm giving verbal recognition for specific, activities tied to our sales stage. And you can kind of put levels to this stuff, right? So to come back here, sales incentives, again, redundant, but it's about incentivizing reps verbally or financially, prize whatever, based on them hitting the bare minimum standards and eventually more. But again, it all starts with tracking. Incentives, you're going to, you can do those things. We all know this: daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually. Okay. Most common is typically going to be weekly and monthly. But, it's the best, highest performing commission-based sales organizations in the world. They do it all, but they have the tracking for it. That they have the budget set aside in the tracking, and they ensure that they execute it so they don't screw up incentives for reps. But anyways, those are kind of the timelines typically around incentives: daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. Most companies are not doing incentives. And so a good starting place is kind of what I've been communicating in terms of an example. Weekly is reasonable for everybody on this call to start doing incentives, and it doesn't need to be a financial incentive. It can just be a verbal one, meaning that, hey, you're going to write a note for yourself every single week in your one meeting, or whatever amount of meetings that you do. But at least in one of your meetings, you're going to provide verbal recognition to one of the reps that performed in a specific way in the last week. And that's going to be technically an incentive for them, although it's a free, more verbal incentive or slash reward. And so my point is baby steps into the incentive process doesn't have to require money. An easy thing for you to implement if you're following is you can do weekly, do a verbal incentive. Hey, I just wanted to recognize Ryan. Stage one, cold calls, door knocks, whatever. Stage two, cold calls. The minimum that we kind of expect here to ensure that you do X, Y, and Z annually is 40 calls a day, which is 200 a week. Ryan did 100% those numbers. So he averaged 80 calls a day, and he did 400 calls last week. Ryan, you crushed it last week. Just wanted to recognize you for doing that. Thank you for showing up like a top one, top 5 percenter for this company. So that's going to be fruitful for you. And that's going to pay off if you continue that kind of effort here. Thank you so much. And so it's really easy to start off with verbal, and that can get you into the rhythm of providing incentives. And then at the right time, you can implement really simple, small budgets and track these things and transition from, just weekly verbal free to weekly verbal plus something small, right? Whatever that is. There's a million things you can Google, right? There's gift cards, there's gas cards, there's let's go out to dinner, there's trophies, there's, staycations, there's vacation. It's all a little bit different, right? But I'm trying to give you some ideas on making this practical for you to implement incentives by just starting with something verbal. Now, eventually, the ideal over time would be, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. There is some type of recognition incentive or financial incentive tied to those events because that's, maximizing your incentive opportunity in terms of, providing a good experience for your reps and reinforcing what we're trying to do here, which is your sales standards in the management process. Now, again, daily, that could be verbal, right? If you don't do daily meetings, that could be, verbal recognition or written recognition in Slack or whatever your communication tool is. Weekly could be verbal or some type of small gift or cash prize, whatever. Monthly could be, dinner with the executive or ownership team or a million other things. Quarterly could be if you do X, Y, and Z over the next 90 days, you're going to get a staycation with a $2,000 value anywhere that you want to go next to your house or whatever. Annually could be top rep for the year. You're going to get a trophy and a $5,000, trip to Cabo, Mexico, whatever it is, right? So, incentives reinforce the standards and provide a little bit of a better culture. Just a side tip for you before I forget, it says recruiting tip right here. For those of you who don't have and anybody can actually do this, by the way, but for those of you who don't have like successful reps yet, you're just kind of starting, or maybe there's a couple reps, but they suck, or they're not as engaged, or maybe you have 0 reps. Well, the reality is when you're starting off versus, if you were to look at a year from now, if you had 7 reps and 3 of those reps were making 6 figures and 4 were, happy and doing decent, well, those are totally 2 different companies, right? One maybe has 0, one has 7 reps with 3 being really successful. And so in the recruiting process, if I come through your recruiting model and you have 0 reps versus 7 reps and 3 of them being successful, well, my confidence in the company that has more sales reps being successful is going to be higher versus the one that has 0. And so, these are just realities among many in the recruiting process. But one of the cool things that you can do among many of the things that we're talking about this week, like developing the vision to be unique, developing the career paths to be unique, from an incentive perspective in the recruiting process, you can come up with some things that look really fancy and look big and make you look a little bit maybe more important, for lack of a better terms, than you are. You can come up with a really, big incentive for the future and actually look like maybe you got a little bit more going on than you may have today. Meaning that, let's say that I'm, doing $1 million in revenue today, and kind of our next big goal is going to be, going to, 10 million. Okay. Because you've developed a bigger vision, like we covered on Wednesday. Well, I can, let's say that reps do 500K each as a bare minimum expectation. So if I'm going from 1 million to 10 million, that's a difference of 9 million. If it's 500K per rep, that's 18 sales reps that we need to ramp up into $10 million in revenue. So roughly it's about 10 reps, or it's 10 reps for every 5 million. So I could hypothetically make an incentive and say, hey guys, so, we've been around for 8 years, and what we're doing that's really unique now is we're going to step on the gas and start to scale the organization. Here's the vision, blah, 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 right? So you're in the recruiting process, but you can develop an incentive that looks really big, but that is not expensive, not that is not expensive for you, but helps you actually convert higher volumes of quality people in the recruiting process. So you're pitching vision, you're pitching leadership opportunities, and you're pitching, hey, one of the unique incentives, and we're going to develop more as we scale the sales team, but one of the unique incentives that we have right now, we're at $1 million in revenue. As soon as we hit the $3 million mark, hypothetically, right? As soon as we hit the $3 million mark, we're going to set aside a $25,000 budget and we're going to go, the top 5 reps are going to go on a cruise together. Or so you could start to develop things like this. Or, hey, once we hit 5 million, we plan to do that in 3 years from now. Um, once we hit the $5 million mark, the top rep for that year, or the top rep, whatever, for XYZ period of time, they're going to get a vehicle. And here's the vehicle or whatever, right? So you can come up with future incentives that look really fancy, that don't cost you anything today, that you won't care about paying in the future because if you've scaled your company to that point, you don't care about the money at that time anyways, but it actually helps you in the recruiting process convert higher volumes of quality people because it's like, oh, these are really unique incentives that this company has as they scale their sales team. Hopefully that makes sense for some of you. So you can get creative there specifically on the recruiting side if you would like. Okay. So incentives, there's a million incentives, verbal, cash, gift cards, gas cards, uh, dinners, food, staycations, vacations, trophies, whatever. There's a million things. You can also get feedback from your team and see, hey, what is our kind of group like? And you can develop incentives around that based on whatever the budget is. You can always design the budget to be attached to revenue so you don't care about investing into the incentives, right? For anybody that does X, Y, and Z this month is going to get this, right? Like if a rep does that, I could care less about investing into this because the company just made 80 grand on that rep or whatever, right? And so eventually, after you start with, kind of something basic, eventually you're going to develop some type of budget and plan these things out a little bit better based on however it is that you want to disperse incentives daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and then ensure that you track these things, right? So you don't screw it up. So if I'm a rep and I'm actually excited about AB incentive and I'm going after it, well, ideally the company's tracking these things and they know when I accomplish these things and they're on top of it. Because if I hit it and nobody brings it up and it's not recognized, and I'm like, hey, I hit this thing like a week ago, but nobody's brought it up. Do I get this? You don't want that. So the point is you want to track these things. Hopefully that all makes sense. So incentives, pushing people to accomplish your standards or eventually better. At the beginning phases of scaling a sales team, it's like, hey, if we can get reps to hit the minimums, that's a beautiful thing. Eventually, tracking gets better. Then you want to kind of get a little bit more creative and step it up a little bit in terms of what you track. That was like the whole red, yellow, green idea, or good, better, best, whatever it is that you want to call it. But you don't have to worry about that kind of nuance today. S19 is how a lot of this stuff, among more, gets actually tied together and brought together and communicated, right? So S19 is about your sales meetings. That's the topic, and it's specifically your sales team meetings and your one-on-one rep meetings. And the first thing that you need to do in your sales team meetings is figure out the cadence and the time, right? So how often are we going to do sales team meetings? And what's the time investment that we're going to invest into those team meetings? How often are we going to do one-on-one meetings? And what's going to be the time investment into those one-on-one meetings? Every company is going to be a little bit different. Eventually, if you get efficient at your meeting process enough and your team's crushing it, in your team meetings, it's really reasonable to get them down to 30 minutes and to still get reps the information and value that they need day to day. But for most team meetings, it's going to be best to just put on the calendar for an hour. And you can shoot to make them 30 to 45 minutes, but usually, people over talk and they go long. And team meetings typically seem to be best outlined for an hour. Okay. They could be 30 to 60 minutes, but 30 minutes, it's hard to execute everything that, the team needs, at least for most. If you have an entry level, high volume, transactional, simple sales model, it's a little bit different. But anyways, if you're not sure yet, start with an hour. Don't change anything for 3 to 6 months. And if you can get more efficient there and make it down to 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you can change it later. So that's sales team meetings, in terms of the time investment. The cadence, it's going to be 1 to 5 times a week, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. That's going to be preference based. Usually the less experience that there is in the sales team, the more entry level the sales opportunity is. Usually the higher volumes of meetings that are beneficial, right? So if I have an entry level canvassing team as an example, in an ideal world, and although most business owners or leaders won't want to do this, ideally I'd get in front of those reps every single day in a daily meeting, 5 days a week. You don't have to, but I'm just painting a picture of the entry level people need typically a little bit more leadership accountability. If I have more of a senior level type of opportunity, you know, one could work, but probably two or three is going to be best. Anyways, part of this is preference based. You got to figure out what it is that you want to do, what it is that you'll consistently execute at, and figure it out. Exactly what actually your team needs. Um, and so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings a week. If I'm doing one, that's typically going to be like on a Monday, or at the latest Tuesday. If I'm doing a couple, maybe that's a Monday, Wednesday, or a Thursday, Friday, Thursday, Tuesday, or if I'm doing a couple, maybe that's a Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday kind of thing. If I'm doing a few, maybe that's the first 3 days of the week, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If I'm doing four, maybe that's Monday through Thursday. If I'm doing five, obviously that's Monday through Friday. Um, and Usually morning's best. Okay, so you got to figure out what's best for you. Weekly or one-on-one meetings, time investment and cadence there. One-on-ones, 30 minutes is great. If you have a really highly technical, complex sales cycle, sometimes 60 minutes works. If you're just starting out your team, and you haven't really done one-on-one meetings, sometimes it doesn't hurt to put it on the calendar for 1 hour. But ideally, over time, you'd get your one-on-one rep meetings down to 30 minutes. Okay. So maybe start with 60 minutes if it's not a thing on your calendar today, and get it down to 30 minutes as soon as you kind of figure out your flow with your team. But executing on the one-on-one is going to be usually more efficient. Now, the cadence of those, that's also going to be dependent on what you want to do. Um, if you remember the onboarding process, in the first 2 weeks, hypothetically, if you were going to execute the strategy that I laid out, in the first 2 weeks, there was a daily end of day meeting for new hires at like 5 p.m. or whatever it is that you would want to do to get their initial questions answered in a group environment, right? So we have the first, we got 3 reps daily in the first 2 weeks in our end of day meetings, and they're getting their initial questions answered. By the end of 2 weeks, they've kind of flushed through their initial questions. Well, coming out of that, it's how often do I meet this rep who's engaged and went through the 2 week initial process? How often do I meet with them um, for one-on-ones? Usually it's going to be weekly during the ramp up phase. So if the ramp up phase takes 60 days to ramp up into, conservative financial success, well, I'm going to, set expectations with that rep that we're going to meet weekly until they're hitting the bare minimums. And so we're going to plan on that being the next 8 weeks, 60 days, whatever. Now, if they ramp up and start to hit those numbers earlier, maybe we kind of make adjustments, but usually you're going to want to meet weekly one-on-one during the ramp up timeline, whatever that timeline is for you. So there's that bare minimum income expectation. If that takes 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, whatever, you're usually going to have one-on-ones during that timeline. Now, if you have more of like a 6 month ramp up, one-on-ones weekly in the first 3 months is good. But anyways, you got to figure out what's best for you. After a rep is ramped up, this is nuanced too. It doesn't hurt to do weekly one-on-ones. That's great. But in some situations, you can, get away with doing meetings every 2 or maybe even 4 weeks. It depends on the nature of the type of people that you're hiring, your sales cycle, the nature of how you want to run things. But after the ramp up period, your one-on-ones are going to be weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Okay. So that's kind of the cadence. Again, those are 30 to 60 minutes too. Ideally, eventually 30 minutes. So what's the structure of sales team meetings and one-on-one meetings? Here's a really good structure that you can roll with that works. Okay. So we got a list of 6 things for both the team meetings and the one-on-one meetings. So team, go through the numbers, spotlight a rep, do a round robin, questions, training, commitments. Okay. So the first thing here, numbers. This is assuming you're reporting things, you have standards, and you want to bring these things to the attention in a group environment. First thing that we're going to do in the sales team meeting. But again, you got to be tracking in the first place. The first thing that we're going to do is go, okay, guys, so let's look at the scoreboard and just kind of run through the numbers for everybody real quick. And I pull up the numbers publicly and we kind of track through those things. And so what that does is it communicates to everybody, hey, this is what the best rep or 2 or whatever are producing. And it also provides public accountability for the reps that maybe are not performing or doing the activities in the way that they know that they should. But ultimately, you have a an environment where, hey, talking about the numbers, the scoreboard in a public environment is normal, and that starts to create some public and natural accountability, which is obviously a positive thing. So you cover numbers at the beginning. Next thing, you'll see a theme in the sales team meeting is, getting other people to talk in the process once your team is large enough to do this. Now, if it's not, then you work with what you got. But eventually, when you got some team members producing, um, or at least one rep and maybe another couple reps that are ramping up, you're going to spotlight a rep. Hey, John, you did really good last week. Everybody knows that we expect a bare minimum of one deal closed every single week, but you crushed it and did 3 sales last week. I'd love for you to just walk us through those 3 deals and anything that stuck out about those 3 deals and why you were so successful last week. And so you're going to go through numbers and then immediately transition to something really positive, highlight a rep, communicate what it is that they did well, and have them specifically talk on that topic for a few minutes. So it's a third party training the team and talking about the reality of how they saw success in the previous 2 days or one day or the previous week or whatever it is, based on the timeline that you discussed, right? Whatever it is that you're recognizing, you're just pretty much having them discuss that. How did you close those 3 deals? Tell us about those 3 prospects. Was there anything that's unique that you think would be valuable to the rest of the team today, right? It will be as simple as, honestly, I just kind of did, what you guys taught me in the onboarding process. Or maybe they'll dive into, details in depth, whatever it is. It's communicating publicly that, hey, people can execute at this job. Here's John. He's going to tell you what he did in the last week to be successful. That's a positive thing. And it's not just you rambling the whole time. Okay. So that's spotlight. Round robin is, now that we got this positive thing, we round robin and involve everybody in the group. Now, if you have a massive team, you can't necessarily do this, so it's nuanced. This is not the only structure to run, a team meeting. But usually this is a great structure to roll with. This will work with a team of less than 10. And as you scale past 10, like we covered the other day, usually your teams are going to scale up to have one leader for every 5 to 10 reps. But, anyways, you get it. The next thing here, the third topic is round robin. So, hey, let's do a quick round robin like we always do. We got 7 people in the meeting today. Talk about one win from the past week, one thing that was a challenge, and I want you to ask a question based around that challenge. And then we'll do a quick round robin. I'm gonna write down your questions real quick. Okay, so John, one win, challenge, and question, and keep it under a minute, right? And then you do that. You involve everybody. So everybody's like, here's a positive thing, here's a positive thing, and they come up with that or whatever it is, right? If they're not seeing as much financial success in the position, it's like, hey, I talked to this really good prospect yesterday. I think it's a deal that's potentially moving forward, and I'm excited about it, right? Or maybe it's like, hey, I set 4 appointments yesterday, or hey, I closed 3 deals, like you said last week, or whatever, right? So you're getting everybody to do a round robin, say something positive, which is public confirmation that your sales program works, and then they're communicating a challenge, right? And having a question around that challenge. Okay. And sometimes you got to set expectations. If people are kind of being, you know, if you start out your meeting right and you spotlight a rep and it's all about wins and then challenges and questions, usually they're not going to be like negative Nancy's. But if somebody's a negative pain in the butt, then you just have a conversation with them on the side, right? Hey, I want you to be able to publicly talk about the challenges that you're having and have questions, but the way that you communicated X, Y, and Z, that's not a positive environment for the rest of the team. I want to keep it positive. It's about talking about challenges and asking a question so we can support you through that, not to, be negative in the group environment. Does that make sense, John? Okay, cool. Now you know for the next call. But the round robin is win, challenge, question. You write down the question, and that's pretty much the basics there. The next thing is going through questions. Hey, so I'm going to go through your guys' questions, and I'm going to, answer questions based on whatever's relevant to everybody, right? So I got 7 questions here. Okay, John, you did this. We'll go through that one. Ryan, you did this. We'll go through that one. Brandon, you did this. We'll go through that. Alvin, you did this one. I'm going to hit you up in Slack via email around this question because it's not relevant to everybody in the group. And all of a sudden you have, maybe 4 out of the 7 rep questions that you cover here. It provides value to everybody on the call, as well as gets those challenges somewhat met in a group environment while offering training. So it's a good support system. Fifth topic is training, right? This is training based on your sales system, right? So you need to have your sales process, your sales tech, all of those things developed, or at least the sales process, right? Stages, scripting, objections, FAQs. And you're typically going to focus on one stage in the sales process: the door knock, the pitch in the home, setting appointments, closing appointments, or maybe it's something granular within a specific stage, right? So if we have a in-home sales pitch, but it's an 8-step presentation, maybe I'm going to go through steps 7 and 8 because that's going through the financing product and asking for the close to get the contract signed. Typically, here, you're going to focus on one specific thing that's very valuable to everybody that aligns with the reporting that you're doing, right? If you're doing reporting and you know that, hey, um, clearly the sales team is struggling here, and this is the biggest opportunity for leverage in our organization. Well, maybe that's what I'm going to train on in our sales team meetings for a couple weeks or whatever seems best from my perspective. Okay, but you're typically going to spend, 10 to 15 minutes training on one stage or maybe something in specific within that stage um, that you want to reinforce for the whole team. Okay, whatever's the most valuable. Depending on the scenario, if somebody's crushing it in that specific area, you can also have them speak up, but it depends on time and these kind of things. And then lastly, you do a round robin and do commitments. Okay, guys, so we got 7 minutes left. Let's do a round robin like we do every week and talk about your commitments. How many calls, discovery meetings, presentation, da 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 da. What is it that you're going to commit to publicly to everybody else before next week? Okay, I will close one freaking deal this week for sure. That's the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum I'm going to do. Ultimately, you provide another public accountability experience for everybody, so they have to verbally say what they're going to do, and that's going to at least for some drive them a little bit forward towards producing better. Okay. So that's sales team meetings. If you guys have any questions, drop it in the Zoom chat box. One-on-one meetings, there's going to be some commonalities, but this is the structure for that. Okay. Again, you can start with 60 minutes if you have the time. If you don't, it's 30 minutes, but you may struggle to fit everything within 30 minutes, especially if you're not familiar with doing one-on-one meetings. So anyways, you got to figure out what's best for you in your one-on-one meetings. Here's the 6 points here. Again, more of this stuff inside of the S20 book for you. First is check-in, right? This is where you slow down for a little bit, not service level, and ideally build some relationship. So how are you doing? How's life going? How's work? How's your personal life? And you're building relationship there. You're checking in. Ideally, there's some depth that happens at least over time. So you're checking in and building rapport, building relationship. From there, you transition into numbers. So it's been a week since we met last. Let's check out your numbers and see how everything is going. Now, just a side note, if everything is going as, if they're hitting the numbers that they said that they would hit, right? If they're hitting the bare minimums and that's the expectation, or if they're hitting their goals, right? Maybe their goals were, above expectations in this way, and they're like, this is what I want to execute, right? If they're hitting the minimums, which is what they want to do, or a specific goal, which is what they want to do, then it's pretty simple from there, right? It's more of a chill conversation. If you're if they're hitting the numbers, then it's like, okay, cool. Well, that's great. Sounds like everything's going well. Seems like you just need to continue doing what you're doing, but are there any issues that you're seeing that we should, work through today? Right? It's more of like an open conversation in that way. How can I serve you? You're doing great. You're hitting your goals, but is there anything missing? How can I serve you? Any feedback? How can I better, lead you through hitting your goals from here? If they're not, which is gonna, in a lot of cases be common, especially in a commission-based sales environment where maybe reps are responsible for lead generation and these kind of things. You're going to check in, build rapport, then you're going to cover numbers. Wherever they're lacking, right? We're going to say, okay, it looks like maybe the opportunities, here, but let's diagnose, kind of the issue here, right? So you're going to go through numbers, and we're going to confront whatever the reality is, and then you guys are going to work together to diagnose whatever the issue is. Now, it's situational, but the ideal scenario in this third step of the one-on-one meeting is that you lead the rep through diagnosing whatever the issue is, right? So at a macro level, if the expectation is, or if their goals are hypothetically to close at least 2 deals per week, and they've gone a month and they've closed 3 deals, which means they wanted to do 8, but they did 3 and they're 5 off. It's like, yeah. So what do you think is going on here, right? I know. Last month you said that this month you wanted to close at least 8, but right now we're on 3. From your perspective, like what's going on? What do you think the issue is? Help me understand it from your perspective. So the ideal is you should know as the leader, whether you're the owner or the active sales manager, you should know the issue, especially if you're doing reporting properly, right? Because the data will just give you the information, but the ideal is that they kind of come to the conclusion themselves and start to admit it, right? Well, honestly, there was that day where I didn't work because my kid was sick, and then the next day I kind of just did my follow-up pipeline. I didn't add my leads and do the calls or whatever, right? Ideally, they self-diagnose, and if that confirms what you know to be true, then it's like, I love that you know that. That's great, right? So you want them to self-diagnose is the ideal. And then if they're not sure how to do that, you want to lead them through that. And if that's not working out well, you just call it out exactly like it is. Yeah, John, so it's really clear, which is good, right? We know the information because we track things here. It's clear that, in the first 3 weeks of the month, to accomplish 8 deals a month, you would obviously, because you know the numbers, right? You would need to do this, 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 and this. But this is really what you did. You did just below 50% of that number, and that's why you're below 50% of your production marks. So it's pretty straightforward. Would you agree? Okay, so that's kind of the vibe here of step three. Four is about coaching, right? So whatever the issue is that we've diagnosed, whether they did it, self-diagnosis, or we did it together, or just told them how it is, from there we want to coach. And sometimes this can also be self done as well, meaning that if they're self-aware, they'll know what the issue is and they'll know what they need to do to solve the issue. Pretty straightforward, right? So the ideal is when you're having a conversation, they self-diagnose the issue and then also self-diagnose the solution. And then from there, you lead them and provide feedback based on whatever that solution is, if you think it's important or if they want it. If they don't know, then you're going to help them. You're going to coach them through it, right? You're going to coach them through whatever the solution is to solve whatever the constraint has been. So what's the issue? We need to diagnose that, and then we want to coach around that issue so you know how to go from this meeting and ensure that this issue not doesn't happen again. But it's up to you, John, right? They have the ability to follow the coaching or not. That's up to them, right? If they don't, they're not going to make the money that they want, and it's not going to work out. But anyways, you get it. So we check in. There's depth. This is where we're building relationship from a management perspective. We go through numbers. We diagnose the issue. We coach around the issue. We discuss commitments. Now, with all that said, John, just for my notes for our next meeting, what are kind of like your 1 to 2 core commitments? Yeah, so those are going to be, this, and this. Okay, that sounds all about right. Seems like if you do that, you'll be back on track, kind of ramping up to those 2 deals a week. But we need to make sure that you kind of stay at that rhythm, or you're going to continue to have the same issue that you're seeing now. We don't want that, right? Okay, great. Then from there, you confirm next meeting. Okay, so we got it on the calendar again for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. That's on your calendar, right? Okay, let's crush it this week. You said that you're going to do this, this, and this. Do that or do better. And I'll see you on the sales team meeting this coming Thursday, okay? All right, peace. And so that's your one-on-one meeting. Now you can get that down to 30 minutes. Start with 60 minutes if you're overwhelmed by the idea. And again, with all these topics, if you want to reduce the content here, you can do that. If you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot, you can reduce the information. If you're more of a technical person, if you're not a salesperson, you're not a sales leader, and you're at the beginning phases of building your sales team, and you're like, oh my gosh, all of this is overwhelming, baby steps would be team meetings and then simply showing up and providing training from providing value from a training perspective, meaning that, let's say it's me and I was with our sales team and I was overwhelmed by all these things. I could just show up and at least provide technical value, right? Here's what we do for clients. Here's what it is. Here's the results. Here's the process. At least I'm providing technical value. There is some value happening for the sales team. So at least there's that, although it's not the most perfect team structure in sales training experience, if that makes sense. So I can provide general training value to the best of my ability as an owner or sales leader, and I can provide a Q&A experience and start there from, as a baby step. But ideally, you get this kind of structure built in eventually. And that same kind of general idea can bleed into your one-on-ones too. How can I serve you? What's missing? Let me provide you some technical or process value while we're here. But eventually you want to have a structure like this. S20, the last topic for the week, is sales optimization. Okay, so this is a management function, but what it is, it's in context of the entire S20 sales team operating system. So you guys learned all week about the S20 framework. We went through 20 topics, or 19 so far. This is the 20th topic. And all of these topics among workbook questions are inside of your workbook. S20 optimization is about taking all of this content, right, this week, now that you have a better understanding of it and actually starting to take steps towards developing and implementing some of these ideas in your business, whatever is most relevant to you now. Now, everybody's in a different place, okay? If you have 0 to 2 sales reps, most likely your focus now needs to be on foundations and systems, which was day 1 and day 2. Day 1 foundations was, sales strategy, sales leads, sales roles, sales compensation. So you need to reduce complexity in your sales strategy. You need to define whatever the best one scalable and profitable lead generation process is going to be. You need to define your role structure for your sales team that you're going to scale. And you need to define your compensation plan based on those roles before you kind of go through anything else. So that was foundations. Day 2, sales systems, which was about sales process. Sales process S5 is your stages, scripting, objections, FAQs. S6 is sales tech. S7 is sales reporting, and S8 is sales administration. Anyways, day 1 and day 2, foundations and systems is probably the focus for you if you have 0 to 2 reps, right? Because that shows me most likely that there's some foundational and sales system things missing. If you have 3+ reps now, producing, that doesn't mean that foundations and sales systems are perfect for you, which is, phase 1 and phase 2 of the S20 sales team operating system. But if you have 3+ successful reps or reps actively selling and making money in your program, that's a sign to me that your foundations and sales systems are good enough to think about the topics of like recruiting, onboarding, and management. And therefore, your focus may be on phase 3 and 4-ish. And naturally for everybody, eventually phase 5. So in terms of S20, that's going to be helpful for some of you to understand most likely where you're at. But what S20 optimization is, it's about building a cadence within your management process, whether it's just you as a solo owner, or you and a partner, or a sales manager and an owner, or an entire executive sales leadership team. It's about building a cadence to say, hey, we understand the S20 framework now, and we're going to proactively improve the sales department and optimize everything on a month-to-month or week-to-week or quarter-to-quarter basis. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to put, a 60-minute to, an hour and 20-minute, a 1 to 2 hour meeting on the calendar at least every month. Ideally 90 minutes every 2 weeks, but figure out what's best for you. So you start with putting things on the calendar and say, here's our S20 sales leadership or sales management meeting or whatever, and you plan to meet. And the purpose of this meeting is to get the management group together, whoever's technically a manager on the sales department side, owners, sales leaders, whatever, and you meet and you go through somewhat of the rhythm that I'm going to cover right now. And this helps you understand, here's where we're at, here's the bottleneck to scale, and here's how we're going to solve it in the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks. And you create an ongoing optimization process. So hypothetically, you meet every 2 weeks for 90 minutes, and the overall goal is to figure out, hey, in terms of the 5 phases, we got 5 phases of scaling a sales team, foundation systems, recruiting, onboarding, and management. We got 20 systems wrapped up in these 5 phases that you guys learned about this week. That's also in the workbook. So if you were to put this on the calendar, you can always refer back to this. But you have 5 phases and 20 systems wrapped up in those 5 phases. And the goal ultimately is to figure out, hey, out of this framework, what is the most urgent thing for us to scale? What's the most urgent and the most impactful? Like, you want to figure out those two, right? What's going to be both urgent and also impactful to our goals, which is, scaling revenue and being more profitable. And the way that you figure this out is you go, okay, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. You're going to rate those things 1 to 10 on urgency and impactful. And so phase 1, foundations. On a scale from 1 to 10, how urgent is it for us to work on this? 1 being not urgent and 10 being extremely urgent, right? So phase 1, 9 out of 10 urgency, whatever, okay? An impact for phase 1 out of 10, what's the impact of our sales team if we were going to solve the foundational aspects of our sales organization? 7, whatever. And you do that for phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. And what this naturally starts to do, if you don't already know where to focus, and maybe you already know where to focus, What this helps you do is it helps you identify which phase for your organization is the biggest focus in terms of unlocking the next level of growth in the sales team. Let's say that I come to the conclusion that, hey, our foundations are good, but clearly phase two sales systems, based on what we learned in the S20 bootcamp, phase two sales systems is clearly the area of focus. Well, from there, I'm gonna, do the same thing and rate it urgency and impactfulness in the systems area as well. So in phase two, sales systems, I got S5, S6, S7, S8, and I'm gonna rate those things in terms of what's the urgency, what's gonna be most impactful, and that's gonna help me typically get a good understanding of which one out of the 20 topics for us this month or these 2 weeks, whatever your cadence is, what is gonna be the most impactful for us to develop and improve so that we can, have an ongoing optimization process in our sales department. So that's kind of ultimately the idea, is it's a framework, and there's more of this framework in the book to help determine what your focus should be. And the ideal is that you funnel it down to fixing one thing. Okay, clearly recruiting is a big thing. We don't want to launch recruiting right now, but out of phase three recruiting, we've come to the conclusion that our vision is not clear. So over the next 2 weeks, we're gonna develop our vision and then come back to this meeting and flush it out 100%. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. And then maybe from there you get done and you're like, hey, phase three is still the focus. Over the next 2 weeks, let's develop our career paths inside of that vision. And then you get to, the next meeting, you go, hey, I feel good. Let's think about actually launching recruiting. S9 is the focus. What do we need to do to execute S9 and implement that so that we can actually launch recruiting and pump reps in? And so it's an opportunity for you to understand, now that you have context of the S20 framework, it's an opportunity for you to understand where to focus. So that's what S20 optimization is all about.